What's up creators, I hope you're doing well. Today we're returning to the AI series. We're going to try to replicate the style of Garrison Hudson. As always, this video was suggested by some of you guys in the comment section on previous videos. So if you have any video that you want me to make or style that you want me to break down, don't hesitate to put it down in the comment section and I'll check them out. Now, you know how this works. First of all, we're going to check out some example images shot by him so we can break down the style, what he does in the color grading, and then we jump into Lightroom, apply that knowledge into editing a photo and creating a preset out of it. So creators, here I have Garrison's profile, Shots by Garrison, in case you want to follow him. And down here, you're going to find the link to his shop where he sells his presets. So if you clicked on this video wanting to achieve the style of this great creator, the best way to achieve it is just to purchase the preset directly from him, the original version. Remember that the purpose of my tutorials is to learn how to color grade and how to observe. So what you're going to see in this video is just how I would go about and achieving a similar type of color grade. Maybe he does it in a completely different manner. There's different ways to color grade. And in the process, while I'm replicating the look, I'm just going to tell you why I'm doing each movement. So you guys can learn a bit of color grading and also learn how to break down a style. So if you want to achieve this specific look, go ahead and purchase the preset directly. If you want to learn, stay and watch this video. Now, if you jump back into his feed, we can see that Garrison doesn't have one specific style. Nothing like Alan Palander, for example, that he edits the photos today the same way he edited them 3 years ago. Right here, we can see a lot of changes. For example, the latest style is the sepia tone that we can see clearly throughout the entire image. Sometimes it's a bit more intense, sometimes a bit softer. Then if we scroll a bit down, now we can see these aqua or very cool tones added to the shadows, very different to the sepias. Then a bit further down, we can see these faded blacks and with harsh or contrasty neon lights. And then further down below, we have completely the opposite. We have contrasty blacks, loads of clarity and loads of saturation. Now, what I'm trying to get to is that he has so many variations on his style that if we wanted to replicate them all, we would be here all day. So instead, we're just going to concentrate on 3: the sepia, then a more intense sepia, and then the aqua. So in this video that you're watching right here, just going to concentrate on the base version of the sepia. And then in a separate video, just for this video not to be too long, we're going to create the more intense sepia and the aqua versions. So let's start breaking down the base style. Now, the sepia version has very nice contrast and exposure, very natural in terms of the highlight roll off and the whites and the midtones. Where we lose a bit of information is in the dark areas. The shadows are a bit more punchy than usual, and in particular the blacks. So notice how in this image, the porch of this little house, well, we don't see anything. Normally we would be able to see maybe the windows, maybe the texture on the wall, even in the tires of this Porsche, we should be able to see some detail. So as we're not seeing some detail, this is telling me that the shadows, he's dragging them towards the negatives. So we're losing a bit of information over there and achieving more of a contrasty looking image. Now, if we were dragging the shadows towards the positives, we would be seeing a lot more detail in those areas, even more than the human eye could see. We would see all the windows, we can see the texture on the wall, even the writing around the wheels, but he's not doing that. He's dragging them towards the negatives. So we can do all these changes either in the basic corrections or in the tone curve. Now, talking about the dark areas on our image, if you pay attention to any of the deepest points of blacks in the images, well, we don't have pure blacks. If you compare it to the black on the interface, we can see that there's a slight difference. The blacks on his images are a bit brighter than usual. They're basically dark grays. Now, this is creating a very natural looking look to the image. Why? Because us, the humans, well, we don't see jet black. We don't see space black. Aside from the astronauts that are in space, here within the atmosphere, we have loads of particles, loads of water, humidity, dust between us and the object. So it's very rare that a human on Earth can see jet black. Do the exercise, just look at a black car, look at your screen on your smartphone, and you can see that it's not pure black, it's basically a shade of gray. So that's why these images look so real, because the blacks aren't completely black or digital black, they're basically grayed out as the human eye would see. That's in terms of exposure and contrast. Then in terms of color, it's the obvious, we have this warm tint added to the image, but it's only added in the dark areas of the photo. Pay attention right here, how the sky in the background, how the windows, well, they're not yellow as the shadows. They're not as yellow. So this is telling me that in the shadow ranges, he's adding this warm tone, but it's not affecting the highlight ranges too much. Now you can add the sepia tone in 3 places within Lightroom. You can add it in the temperature, you can add it in color grading, and you can add it in the RGB channels. Some details in terms of color, for example, the blues tend a bit towards the aqua tones, the reds tend a bit towards the brick-like colors, and we can do this in camera calibration. And finally, we have a very nice grain, adding some texture, some age into the images, very similar to 35mm film. So creators, that's it for the analysis. Now let's jump into Lightroom and start recreating this look. But before that, I'm going to remind you that the 3 presets that we're going to create today are already included in the AI preset pack V4. So link up here in case you want to check it out. Now, if you already have the V4, just download it again, and the preset pack will be updated with the new filters. So if you're not familiar with the AI V4, it contains all the presets from the AI series that you create throughout this entire season. So as I break down more styles and more tutorials, more presets will be added into that pack. So that's a great way you can skip all my tutorials and having to go to the process of saving the presets manually, but in the process you can support me. So browse around my shop over there, you're going to find the V4, the V3, V2, V1 preset packs, and also my personal preset packs that I use every single day to edit all my photos in a faster manner, and also my LUTs to help me edit video in a faster manner, because we all know that editing video, color grading video is a long process. So if you can support me by purchasing anything over there, I'll be very thankful, so I continue to do videos for you guys. And if you can't, it's not in your possibilities, don't worry guys, let's jump into Lightroom and start editing. Okay creators, here I am in Lightroom Classic in the develop module. Don't worry if you're using another version of Lightroom, it's exactly the same process because it's exactly the same tool, only that the interface is a bit different. Now here I have this image of this fire truck, and I chose it not because it's the best image in the world, but we have the shadows, we have some blacks over here, we have some highlights and even some whites, and we have the 3 colors or the 2 colors that we want to alter, the reds and the blues and the greens over here. So it's not the craziest of image, but it will work to create these presets. Now, as you can see, I already corrected a bit of the exposure because this image was a bit underexposed on field. I don't remember if it's because I shot it in APS-C, or maybe the shutter speed was too much for this occasion, or maybe I had an ND filter on top. I don't quite remember, it was way back. So let's start off, first of all, nailing down the exposure and contrast. Those blacks were a bit faded out, and then those shadows, which were a bit more contrasty than usual, and then we're gonna move into the colors. So for exposure and contrast, I'm just going to skip the basic corrections, and today we're going to use the tone curve. If you don't know how the tone curve works, I already made a specific tutorial about it, but in a very simplistic way to put it is that this line is the representation on our image. This point at the top right corner controls our whites, this point at the bottom left corner controls our blacks, and if we drag any part of our image towards the top left corner, like in the midtones over here, we brighten them up, and if we drag them towards the bottom right corner, we can darken specific areas, and we can divide our image by adding points into the amount of parts that we want. Now for this tutorial, first of all, we want to fade out those blacks. So this point at the bottom left corner controls the blacks. So I'm not going to go towards the right, otherwise we bring more intensity to them, but drag it towards the top without moving it toward the right, just upwards. And not too much, otherwise our blacks are completely gone by this point, but ever so slightly, maybe around the 10%. In this case, I'm going to go with the output of 9 over here. And this is basically this input, and output is just the coordinates of this point. So 0 in the input and 9 in the output if you want to type it in. And now you pay attention to our blacks over here. Notice the difference. They're a bit faded, they're a bit grayish, not completely black as we had in our first image. Okay, next up, if this is the blacks, this is the whites, well, the shadows are this area over here. So I'm going to create a point over here, and I'm not going to go upwards, otherwise we'll bring more information into the dark areas. We want to bring them down so we have more contrast. I'm going to go with a value of 53 and 44 in the output, and it's just adding a lot more strength into the dark areas of our image. Now the problem right here is that the tone curve being this, a curve being a continuous line, you can see that the movements that we did over here are affecting also our midtones and even our highlights. Now the highlights, we want to preserve them very naturally. That's what we saw in the example images. They weren't affected, they weren't brightened up, they weren't lowered. We want to leave them as they were. So I'm going to create another point over here, and this one will act just as an anchor. We're going to place it just along the diagonal that we have as a reference of our starting point. Over here, the points are going to be 216 in both input and output. And this is basically just making sure that our bright areas are going to be well controlled and well preserved. So these points are basically acting as anchors because we didn't move them. Okay, with Y on our keyboard, you can see the before and after, and immediately can notice how our image is a lot more punchy in terms of the shadows, a lot more contrasty compared to our original. Okay, believe it or not, that's all I'm gonna do in terms of exposure and contrast. Now let's move down into color grading. And for color grading, the first thing that we need to add is that sepia tone in the shadow ranges. Now we could use color grading over here. We can add a tone here in the shadows. But for this tutorial, I'm gonna add a tone using the RGB channels. As you can see right here where I'm in the point tone curve that combines the red, the green, and the blue primary to give us exposure and contrast, but we can also alter them individually. So I'm gonna go with the blue channel over here, and as you can see, it has some blue on one side and then have yellow on the other. So the blue channel will allow us to add some blue, some indigo blue, or some sepia. For example, if I change my image into black and white, and I add a point in the midtones and drag it towards the top left corner, we can achieve that indigo cool black and white. Now, if I drag it towards the bottom right corner, we achieve black and white sepia. So this is a quick way to achieving the sepia tones. You can obviously go to extremes. In this case, I'm going to revert to my color. And in particular, what we want to add is this yellow cast into the dark areas on our image, not so much in the highlight. First of all, this point at the bottom left corner will control our blacks, our dark areas. I'm going to drag it towards the right to add more yellow, and not too much, otherwise this is way too extreme, but maybe around the 25 is going to be enough. 26 is going to be the input. Output at 0 because I didn't move it upwards. And right here, we're adding this warm tone, this sepia tone into our shadows. This is exactly what we wanted. Now the problem right here is that we only want it to be added to the shadows. Again, because this is a continuous line, we're also adding it into the midtones over here and also into our highlights. So guess what? We need to create more anchor points. So I'm going to create a point over here. I'm going to drag it towards the diagonal, just around there. Input 117, also the same value for the output, so it's right in the middle. And right here, we've contained the amount of yellow in our midtones. The problem is that this being a continuous line, we're also adding, as you can see over here, our curve is slightly upwards towards the blue tones. We're adding some blue into our highlight ranges. So we need to control that as well. So we're going to create another point over here and drag it again towards the diagonal. Just around there, the value is going to be for the input and for the output 148 for both of them. So right here, as you can see, now it's basically a straight line in our highlights and also in our midtones, and we're basically just adding this warm tone into the dark areas on our image, to the blacks and into the shadows. We can deactivate the tone curve. This is before and after. Now we have the contrast, now we have the warmth. This is exactly what we wanted. Now let's continue detailing some of the hues. So we're going to go into camera calibration over here, and this is very similar to the RGB channels because it allows us to control the red, the green, and the blue primary, the RGBs. But in this case, we can alter a bit of the hue, but also in terms of saturation. So it's a very similar tool, but with different presentation. Now, if you're on Lightroom Mobile, which is the only version of Lightroom that doesn't have camera calibration, you can achieve what we're going to do right here in HSL up here in Color Mixer. We're going to change a bit of the hues only. So you're going to change the reds and also the blues. So right here, what I'm going to do, first of all, the reds, we want them more towards the brick-like colors. If we zoom in, we don't want our reds to be towards the pink-like colors. We want them a bit towards the positives, not too much, but enough so our reds are slightly shifting into the warmer tones, something around there, and towards the oranges, plus 15 in the hue. And then we want our blues to shift towards the aquas. Now, as you can see, by moving the blue primary, we're also affecting other hues because, well, it's a primary color of the image. Every single pixel in our image is composed from the reds, the greens, and the blues all mixed together in different amounts to give us different amounts of exposure and also different hues. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to go towards the negatives to change our reds more towards the oranges, but also to change our blues towards the aquas. Now, I'm going to go quite low, maybe around the -30. You guys can play around. And right here, as you can see now, our blues are a bit accentuated, and also we have those brick-like colors in the reds. So this is what it does. It's very subtle, but it's there. This is before and after, and as you can see, our reds are becoming a bit brighter and also our blues, and just with a slight tone shift to the colors that we wanted. Okay, next up, let's add some grain. So let's zoom in just a bit to see it in a bigger screen. You can add some amount over here to activate the tool. And right here we have a very fine grain, which is almost like noise, like digital noise. So what I'm gonna do is amp up the size just a bit, around the 50s, maybe around here. 53 is the value that I'm gonna go. And now I'm gonna drag the grain down, the amount, around the 30s, something like that. We have very nice grain over here, simulating the film look, but it's not too distracting, just giving it a nice texture to the image. Now, as always, I like to remind you guys that grain, maybe you guys need to adjust a bit of the size just to match the type of look that I have over here. Why? Because it's not an intelligent tool. So for example, this image is shot with APS-C with a 24 megapixel sensor. So it's 6000 times 4000 pixels. And we have this very nice grain, but maybe if I apply these same values into my image shot with a full frame camera, a 33 megapixel A7 IV, maybe the grain is a bit smaller. So maybe you guys need to adjust, just pull up the size just a bit, or maybe you have a smaller sensor, maybe you need to drag the size just a bit down so it's not too big. So you always have to keep that in mind. Grain is not the most intelligent of tools. Okay guys, believe it or not, we've finished with this preset. This is why on our keyboard we have the before and after. Now we have that warm tone in the shadows. We have very nice contrast. We have a beautiful grain and the colors that we wanted. I think we did quite a good job with this preset. Just a reminder that you don't always have to create the most heavy of edits, move every single slider. Sometimes if the image is correct, depending on what you want, maybe you just need to move a bit of the contrast, move a bit of the saturation, and you're basically done. In this case, we did tamper a bit with the color grading, but it was a very simple edit compared to other ones that we've done. So this preset is basically complete, but before we save the preset, we always need to test it out in several images to see if we did quite a good job, or if it could be the case that this preset works perfectly for this photo and this photo only. So it's always good practice to test out your presets in different scenarios. So let's right click, settings. We're going to copy the settings. We're going to mark everything that we used. And I'm going to move into other images to see if we did a good job, and then we're going to save it. So how about over here of this very pleasant lady that we found in the metro? Let's apply the preset, right click, settings, paste settings. And then we have our before and after. Notice the difference. The image is a bit darker and more punchy, more contrasty. We have that warm tone in the shadow ranges. Now this image is very dark, so Lightroom is considering most of this image as shadow, with the exception of the area around the light over here. So you always have to keep in mind that this preset, as it's working with a grade in the shadows, it will largely depend on how dark your image is or how bright. So for example, notice what happens when I pull the exposure towards the positives. If I push it ever so slightly towards the overexposure, notice how that yellow cast that we added in the tone curve starts to recede, only to be applied in the darkest parts of our image. It's disappeared from this wall, it's disappeared from her. But if I reset the exposure, notice how it comes back up. So you always have to keep that in mind when you're working with presets that contain a specific hue to a specific area of exposure. So finally, in this image, which has very nice lighting, quite dark, so let's apply the preset and see how it performs. Yeah, and there we have it. This is exactly what I wanted. Notice how we have the warm tone added into the dark areas of the image, but notice how the bright areas, for example, this sign over here, isn't being affected by the warm tone that we added. This is exactly what we wanted and exactly what we achieved with the anchor points in the tone curve. We only are affecting the dark areas on our image, and I think we did quite a good job. Notice the difference in terms of contrast. Our image is a lot punchy, a lot more dramatic, a bit of faded blacks, and a very nice grain. I think this preset looks well. So now we can go ahead and save it. So we're going to go to the left panel over here. On the preset, hit the plus sign, create a preset. Here you're going to name it and mark or check mark every single box that you did use. Now, 3 boxes that I don't mark is exposure, contrast, and white balance. Why? Because sometimes, well, most of the times my images are poorly shot on field. They're very rushed. So I need to correct sometimes the exposure, sometimes the white balance over here, and I like to leave them at 0. So these are the only 3 values that I move around when I'm editing my photos and when I'm applying a preset. So there's the first preset, the sepia variant. I think we did quite a good job. And remember, this is just my interpretation of this type of coloring, how I would achieve it. So let's move on into the next video where we're going to create the ultra sepia variant and also the aqua variant, which are a bit different from this one. They're very intense, but they're very interesting as well. So I'll see you in that video. And if not, don't worry guys. Remember that these 3 presets are already in the Analyze Preset Pack V4. In case you want to support me, link up here. Also, remember there's the Analyze Preset Pack V4 and the Analyze LUT Pack V4. So I've reconverted these Lightroom presets into LUTs so you can apply them into your video work as well. So if you can support me by purchasing anything over there, I'm very thankful. If not, don't worry guys, let's jump into the next video.